and welcome to another episode of Bailiwick Podcasts. I'm Jodie Yettram, and today I will be speaking with marine conservationist Kevin McIlwee. Kevin is the chair of a local charity called Jersey Marine Conservation, and he also leads a team of divers who document marine life in our waters. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at one of Kevin's key projects. Since 2015, he's been involved with exploring and documenting the lesser-known Sauvage Reef. The reef is located 20 miles from Jersey's coast, and it's very rich in species. However, it is under threat due to a lack of protection from fishing, which is something that marine conservation charities have been pushing for. The name Sauvage translates to wild in French, which is a fitting description given its strong currents and challenging diving conditions. Despite this, Kevin and other researchers have been studying it for years, which has led the government to consider making it a protected area. Today, we're going to dive into the history and ecology of the reef, the importance of marine conservation, and what the future holds for this hidden gem. So, Kevin, welcome. Really nice to have you here. It would be great if you could just start off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do.
I'm Kevin McIlwee. I'm the chairman of Jersey Marine Conservation, and I really have several hats, but in the beginning, what I was doing was gathering data which would be in support of marine protection proposals. Out of that, we've grown an education side where we go into schools and tell the youngsters about the incredible creatures that live in the rock pools and intertidal areas, and keep pretty busy, because what I'm trying to do is to make sure that that information goes into the right hands so that it helps with decision making. And also, of course, as a charity, quite a lot of expenses. I mean, we've got a 7-metre rib that we use for a lot of our research work, so always needing to raise funds in support of that. Involved with university students as well. They come along and they say they'd like to investigate seagrass or seals, dolphins. How can they go about it? And I like to support those kind of projects. It's really good when somebody actually comes along and says, this is what I want to do, rather than me trying to persuade people to actually get involved.
For sure. And you are the coordinator for an organisation called Sea Search.
Yes, Sea Search actually was formed by a group within the Marine Conservation Society UK who were divers, and they said that they could gather a lot of information on dives, that divers were often seeing things and that information would be really useful, but divers didn't really know what they were looking at. You know, it was a fish or it was was it a plant? What was it? So they set up a structure for all of that. And throughout the British Isles, there are groups that go into the sea, gather the data. That's expanded now. There are people that are doing it through snorkeling, even just wandering about. And I think the key part about it is it's a methodology that is approved. So if a person sees something and can reasonably identify what it is, that information will go into the national database, and it's there then for the researchers who are looking into those areas and want to get some kind of a picture of what actually is happening. Not just kind of a snapshot, but a continuous update on those areas as well. So if an area has been, for example, created as a marine protection area, they're looking at what effect that's had actually on that seabed community.
And why is it so important to have all of this data sort of recorded?
If you are trying to get an area protected, the question that's maybe going to come from the fishermen or people that have got properties or use that area for recreation is, well, you know, why do you need to do this? How is it going to affect me? And so it's quite important that we demonstrate that those areas need to be protected. So, you know, what's key to it? Well, there are commercial fish that are important to the fishing industry. There are also species that are food sources for those creatures. There are areas where those creatures breed and develop through their juvenile stages. So all of those aspects are key parts of our marine environment. If we didn't have a marine environment, we wouldn't have a land-based environment either. that our marine areas need to be protected if we're going to ensure that species survive long term, and also that our climate isn't radically altered through climate change. I'd say it's very difficult now to actually stop this process. I think the process is really now one of trying to slow it down. But if we can do that in any way, by, for example, storing carbon in our seagrasses and our kelps, well, that's going to be incredibly beneficial. So, that's what we're trying to do, is to, first of all, identify where those areas are, demonstrate why they are important, and then help by supplying that information to those people in a position of authority that can actually put forward marine protection areas.
And one area that you've been investigating for a number of years and that you've identified is very, very diverse and a very special habitat is the Sauvage Reef. And I was wondering if you could tell me a bit about its characteristics and why that area is so special.
Jersey waters are quite unique. We have a high tidal range. That tide is bringing in nutrients, it's bringing in things what we call like plankton, important food sources for crabs, some of our fish species, mollusks, stuff like that. And the Sauvage Reef sits in a kind of almost like a crossroads of currents. I guess if I was talking to people maybe a little bit travelled, maybe if they could picture somewhere like Ayers Rock underwater, slightly modified in that in recent years we've found that actually there is a canyon that goes east to west in it and one that goes north to south. There are cliff faces, overhangs, boulders, and in amongst all of that there are these incredible sunset cup corals and anemone. Beautiful looking, but also an indicator of a very rich environment, an area that's not been polluted. So what we're looking at really in the Sauvage Reef is this unique area that has managed to survive against the rest of our seabed, which unfortunately has been heavily damaged by some of the fishing activities that have gone on there. So the Sauvage Reef is working as a stepping stone, in that if creatures can breed on that area, then they can then spread to other areas as well. So that means that potentially the Sauvage will supply key creatures to other reef areas and of course spread throughout our waters and all of the surrounding Channel Islands and French coastal waters as well. So it's a stepping stone area. So as well as being incredibly beautiful, an area of some of the rarer crustaceans that we now are not seeing so many of in our waters, we're seeing down there. There are a huge number of these things that we call mermaids' purses, and they're actually the kind of eggs that the rays have actually given birth to, attached to again another key species, which is the pink sea fan. It's this huge gorgonian, and when you look at that you can see that all of these ray eggs are all attached to those. So it's a very important area for ray breeding. When we've been down there, we've seen the sunfish feeding on the jellyfish in those waters. We've seen the dolphins down there feeding. We know that the seals go down there. So all of these creatures, right the way from the bottom to the top of the food chain, the food pyramid, are actually using that area to feed and survive and breed.
Wow, it sounds absolutely amazing. I was just wondering if you could tell us a couple of your favourite finds when you've been diving down there.
Well, you can imagine this sort of a kind of a mesh, an orange big mesh, like a big fan that somebody would use to keep themselves cool, but about 1.5 meters high. Now, in our waters, I might come across those gorgonians, but they might be no more than about 0.5 meter tall. Now, also, when you look at a fan like that, you can actually age it, because they only grow at about 15 centimetres a year. So our sea fans probably 10 to 15 years in age. Down on the Sauvage, these are 1.5 meters high. Now you're beginning to say, well, wow, they've been around a long time. And what you're actually seeing is, it's like a forest. You go in a forest and you've got small trees growing, and then you've got these big trees that have been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And you've got that whole spectrum of life that's gone on way longer than we've existed. And that's what we're getting down there. We've got remnants of at the time when all of that area was covered with ice, not water. We've also got the sunset cut coral, not just individually, but some of the overhangs and caves are absolutely plastered with them on their ceilings and their walls. So it's not just them existing there, it's the abundance of them as well. So these are kind of unique capsules of these rare and unusual creatures.
So despite all this diversity and the abundance of species, I understand that the area is not protected?
No, I mean, really, very little of Jersey waters are protected. There are different mechanisms, but what there still isn't in place in some key areas is protection that stops the seabed from being damaged, for example, by these rakes that are taken across the seabed to get scallops. And although the Sauvage Reef isn't really conducive to that type of activity, the problem is that the boats have got such incredible technology that they can go right up to the edges. So those peripheral areas which are being used by, for example, crabs that have grown from juveniles and are spreading out, it's disturbing all of those areas. The merle, which is a calcified seaweed and is a honeycomb, and you've got all these tiny little crabs in there and worms and stuff like that. Well, when a dredger goes over that, it's like breaking a piece of chalk that you would write on a board with, and it just turns to dust. And that then means that whole network for these minute creatures has been completely destroyed and potentially will not ever recover again. So, there's the impact of that. I think that although normally people would say, well, things like potting do not affect areas, unfortunately, because there's been these lengths of pots put down onto those areas, there has been damage because the ropes move around in the currents and tides. And of course, that is damaging these important sea fans as well. So, what we've got to really try to do is to bring in some form of a mechanism. And there are different ones. Obviously, there's ones that restrict the amount of fishing going on. There are mechanisms that say that, that you can't take anything from those areas. And I think in the case of the Sauvage, given its diversity and importance, I think that what we really need is something a bit like the restrictions that are in place in Portlet Bay, which is a no-take zone. And this is only a small area. That's the other thing, is that, not asking the commercial fishermen to give up huge areas. It's a relatively small area.
So it just bans fishing altogether in a small protected area. Okay, yeah.
However, I have to be a little bit reserved in that comment, because I think that if you start putting in legislation, we all know things like, if we're driving our car and we're told, well, you can only drive at 20 mile an hour. Well, we kind of might go a little bit faster. But in general, a far more effective way of doing this is to get people to actually support it, understand why it's important, and want to protect it because they know the benefits of it. So, although legislation is a way forward, in the end, unless people really support how important it is and want to see it survive, really, it's not going to be as effective as it needs to be.
So does this tie into your work around going to schools and raising awareness of Jersey's waters and why they're so special?
Well, they're youngsters, one day they're going to be adults. I mean, some of the children that speak to me, they say, oh, my dad's a fisherman, or even my mum's a fisherman, or sells fish or whatever. And, they ask us questions, and then they go home and they ask their parents what they're doing, So the parents probably don't really like me, because kids going home and saying, Mum, why are you doing this? Or Dad, why are you doing that? But I think that they need to know this. Youngsters on our island, they get a hard time, don't they? Because it's like they get all this stuff at school about, well, we need to really think about conservation and we've got climate change. And they go through college and they go through university and they're all into conservation and they would love to become conservationists. And they look down the job list, and there's like, finance this and bank this and whatever. And there's actually very little opportunity for them to be conservationists. Mm-hmm. So by trying to get them to understand the importance as youngsters, I'm rather hoping that they will bear that in mind when they're unfortunately in jobs that maybe are not so conservation minded, and when they're having children of their own and they're trying to get their children to understand it. There's probably a bit of a sinister side as well, because we at the moment we're very concerned about things, but it's not having a massive impact on our lives. But what will it be like in 10 or 20 years' time? It could be a lot more serious. And so those youngsters are going to have to deal with those sort of things. So again, you don't want to put children in fear of the future, but I think it's quite important that they actually support the need for protecting our environment.
And it's such a big part of Jersey's identity and history, obviously the ocean and the marine environment. And I was just wondering, have you noticed sort of any changes in Jersey's waters since you've been diving?
I think that, certainly some of the areas that were being dredged are not being dredged now.
Mm-hmm. And what were those areas?
Well, particularly areas, for example, off our east coast, where zones have been put in place, and I've dived those sites and they are looking much more healthy. And give it 2 or 3 years more and those seabeds will have the potential to be productive. So there is recovery going on there, but what we've got to avoid is that suddenly then it almost becomes like a gold rush where people say, wow, it's all back again. Let's just get in there and grab what we can. We just can't allow that. And then, of course, obviously, in terms of the species that we're seeing in our waters, we are seeing the bluefin tuna coming back into our waters. We're seeing, as well as bottle-nosed dolphins, a lot more common dolphins within our waters. Well, they are indicator species. So if they're in our waters, then there must be the food resources in there as well. So, there are signs of recovery. It's a tug of war because, we're trying to help the environment recover. But then, like now, we've had all these storms which have done an incredible amount of damage to the seabed. They've ripped away the kelps far more rapidly than they normally would be, exposed some of the other seaweeds and stuff like that. So it is a game of trying to keep pace with what is occurring due to climate change. There is some recovery, but we can't really be complacent about it. We can't say that we've dealt with it. There's still a long way to go.
And what's next for Jersey Marine Conservation and Sea Search? What other projects do you have, or what other things are you investigating at the moment?
There's a few that we've got ongoing. One I've not mentioned about is seagrass, and what we have been looking at is replacing the mooring systems in St Catherine's as an example, because the moorings do a lot of damage to the seagrass. And what we've proposed to Ports of Jersey is an environmental system, which they've accepted. They've put 3 trial systems in. We've been monitoring those, looking at whether in fact they're able to function without damaging the seagrass. If that works, their proposal is to put a lot more of those in St Catherine's area, so that seagrass area, which is huge but severely damaged by the moorings, will recover more. We've also been looking at our seal population. Get a lot of reports. Apparently recently there's been 4 pups washed up. Well, surprisingly, we don't really know where the seals go. A report that I was reading last week was that there was 1 or 2 seals that the French had actually seen that had come all the way from the west coast of Cornwall.
Wow.
So, the question is do the seals stay in our islands, or do they move around?
Yeah.
And so, do they move around because of their feeding habits and stuff like that, and breeding habits? So, we're learning more about that. So we've been going on a monthly basis to the minkies, ecros, pats at Nostra Reefs, and trying to identify the individual seals, and then hopefully people can look out for those and see how much they're moving around. We've been going back to some of the areas that we have previously surveyed and looking at how they've changed, the areas that are protected, areas that are not protected, and updating that. So we've been active on that, and then also there are lots of areas around our waters that still have not been surveyed, and so we're trying to build up that picture of where these key reef sites are and whether we should be considering those within the future protection mechanisms. Marine Spatial Plan has looked at a lot of the data that we've collected, and they are saying that they want to monitor what is happening. They need to monitor it. So we'll be doing a lot more of that. I suppose, if there was a general trend in our activities, it's that now that we know more and we know about the key areas and the key species, we're focusing on those because they are giving us indicators of how our marine environment is changing. So it's focusing on specific species or specific areas.
If people want to learn more about these projects you've done, how would they go about finding this information?
Well, we've got a really good website, jerseymarineconservation.org. So, they really are welcome to have a look at that website. Facebook, we're trying to keep the Facebook going as much as we can. We've got doing some talks, which people listening to this might be interested in. On the 29th of January, we've put together a little celebration of World Wetlands Day. That will be in the Geopark Theatre at the Town Museum, Monday evening, 17:30 to 19:30. I've put together some speakers. I'm going to be talking about the Paternoster Reef and that area. I've got Bob Tompkins, he's going to talk about the archaeology of the wetland areas. I've got Katie Bacquet, who from Marine Resources, who's been coordinating all of the Ramsar areas. Catherine Dunn, who is now my education officer, and she's going to be talking about seagrass, and we're going to have a panel at the end of that so people can ask questions. So if they want to come along to that, then go along to the Jersey Heritage website and book a seat. Love to see them there.
And you're obviously a small charity. How could people support you financially?
Well, we do have donation systems. I mean, from the website, if they're happy to make a donation. I like to link up with people giving money, because even if it's just 10p, it's great. And so if they want to contact me at Jersey Marine Conservation, the address is on the website. I'll get back to them and I'll set something up with them so that they can make a donation. I mean, we do need volunteers, but we really do need more specialists, particularly people that can dive and take underwater photographs, and people that perhaps know things about seals and things like that. We do cleanups as well, where we go into some of the remote coves and remove the fishing nets and all the bits and pieces as well. So through the website is the best way to contact us, and we will get back to people that want to get involved and do our best to find something that they can do.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been really, really interesting. I've loved hearing about it, and I'd love to go and visit it at some point.
Yeah, well, Jodie, we'll have to. You did say that you'd never been to the Minkies, so perhaps we need to follow this up with a summer report on what we're doing.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Bailiwick Podcasts. I hope you enjoyed learning more about the reef and about Jersey's marine environment. If you would like to learn more, visit bailiwickexpress.com or visit jerseymarineconservation.org. Stay tuned for our next episode, and thank you for listening.